a movie called Looper from 2012, directed by Ryan Johnson, starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Bruce Willis, Emily Blunt. Quick logline: in 2074, when the mob wants to get rid of someone, the target is sent into the past, where a hired gun awaits someone like Joe, who one day learns the mob wants to close the loop by sending back Joe's future self for assassination. That was weirdly written, but hopefully that made sense, sort of.
That sounds like it's after watching the movie.
I
You could say that to
exactly.
somebody too. I think that makes sense. Hopefully it does.
So I put this as my wild card because this was the first time I saw Emily Blunt kind of do something like this, which is a little bit more harsh. She has a gun in her hand. She has a southern accent. It's like a hard kind of role because up to this point, like you were saying earlier, she'd been in romantic comedy. She's been in a few dramas, like lighter movies or dramatic movies, but not this sort of a harsh, hard, almost actiony kind of role. And I think you don't have Edge of Tomorrow if you don't have Looper, in my mind. And this was sort of the step towards that. And I just remember watching this movie, which was very entertaining, very cool, very slick when I watched it the first time, but then being totally blown away by Emily Blunt is in this movie.
Hmm.
Actually, for me, it was more so in this than Edge of Tomorrow because
Hmm.
this movie came before. So I knew that she could do this versus here. I never even heard her do an accent, you know? Like for me, she was very British up to this point. Whether she pulls
I
off
was
the
gonna
accent
say,
or no is a different thing. She
yeah, I don't think you
doesn't.
still heard her do an accent.
I know, exactly.
It's
It's
not
very
working.
choppy.
Yeah, it's
No, it
not
doesn't
good.
work.
Yeah.
But it's different though, you
Hmm.
know? And but her physicality is different. She's very harsh, like I said. Like she has so much of pain and but not in like a melancholic sort of sad way, but in like a hardened kind of way. And I just not seen that energy from her before, and I think she nails it in this movie. So I just remember being really wowed by that because it was a total surprise when I watched the movie the first time. But yeah, I'll share my more thoughts as we go. What I'm assuming you watched this movie when it came out.
Yeah, I actually had I'd mentioned before I was went to USC on the podcast, and so did the director Ryan Johnson, and
Uh-huh.
actually was involved in an alumni organization for many years at USC, and we arranged a screening with Ryan to come and talk
Oh,
about the movie and screen it. So that's the first time I saw it with
very
Ryan there,
cool.
which was cool. And I'll get into more of my thoughts on the film in a bit, but on in terms of Blunt, it was actually interesting because when so this was not my wild card choice. So it's just there will be one more movie we're talking about. There's no more overlaps. I actually had forgotten she was in this. When you put this
Oh,
in the list, I was like, Looper, Emily Blunt is in this. And then when I rewatched it, I was paying kind of more attention to her in this. And I don't know, she didn't really work for me, oddly, in this movie. I felt that yeah, the accent wasn't good, but it's hard to do like those accents. That's not necessarily the reason. It just she felt like she was trying to like the acting came through a little bit in this to me, and she felt a little too young to be playing a part like what the movie needed. And it just yeah, she didn't feel like adult enough if that makes sense in her performance. I mean, yes, she also looks, she has still her baby face. At the time
mhm.
she, was a little younger, but I don't know. She didn't really work for me in this for what she needed. And again, we could talk more about the movie in a
Yeah.
bit, but yeah, I was surprised, that I'd forgotten she was in it. And then secondarily, like that she just, I don't know, it just wasn't really doing it for me. Like she felt like this is not really the right property, and whether it's just how she was directed, or I mean, the part is very meaty and interesting and important in terms of what the movie's trying to do. I just think there could have been maybe somebody else in this that would have worked better.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I had not watched this movie since it first came out, and I
Me
watched
neither,
it
actually. Yeah.
recently, and I was like, oh, I don't think this is really working very well. But as I zoom out and we can now talk about the movie, I don't think the whole movie works either.
Hmm.
You know, I think it's a very try-hard movie. It was fresh and cool when it came out. It looked different, like the prosthetics and, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Bruce Willis, that connection and such. It felt interesting and cool, but kind of, I'm sorry to say how I feel about Ryan Johnson's movies, where they can feel really cool and fresh, but they don't age very well.
Hmm.
And this movie really feels like a movie of its time. Like it feels like a movie made in the 90s, actually, even though it's not.
Hmm.
And just rewatching it, like the plot is just convoluted, overly explained, and the filmmaking feels like, try hard, like I said. And even though I think Bruce Willis is very good in the movie, but yeah, just it doesn't hang together in my mind. And that to me then started to feel like, okay, it's actually not so much Emily, it's just the
Mm.
movie overall and how it's just put together. And so it's a, yeah, I was glad to rewatch it because in my mind, this was a kind of a cool surprise movie. And I think it did pretty well.
It did. Yeah, it
Yeah.
did perform well. Yeah.
So it was kind of, I won't want to say it was good, but it was sort of interesting to go back and watch it again. I am happy though that it opened another door for Emily. Like I
Yes.
was saying earlier,
Yes.
like I don't
Hmm.
think she does Edge of Tomorrow and becomes this sort of, well-rounded four-quadrant star, which, she's still on that journey. It hasn't really worked, but
Hmm.
this was a pretty important stepping stone in that direction, I think.
No, I definitely agree with you on that, on Emily. And with the film, I remember at the time I didn't really like it that much. I thought it was okay. And I haven't seen it since then. And it's definitely has a very strong following of people who are like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
this is like a classic science fiction movie of the last 20 years. Oh, it's so great. So I was kind of going back in with, okay, I'm gonna take another stab at it and see, maybe I missed something or now I will like it better. And it still to me just felt, yeah, very like kind of amateur-y. Like I don't, I love time travel movies.
Yeah.
And what I like about them is when they kind of go over whatever their specific mechanics are of how time travel works. That I find interesting. Like each of these movies, like Back to the Future or Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, they have different takes on what time travel is and how, the past interacts with the future, et cetera. And this movie basically says, we're not going to deal with that. There's a scene where Bruce Willis is there talking to George Gordon-Levitt, who's his past self, and he sort of yells and he's like, "That doesn't matter. Like, what I'm gonna stand here and draw diagrams for 10 minutes and explain how this all works?" And I'm like, yeah, that'd be kind of interesting. Just intellectually, I love to like, okay, how are you presenting time travel? And they kind of
Mm-hmm.
try to be clever about that and say, oh, don't worry about it. It's just kind of enjoy the movie. But if you're throwing time travel in here, I kind of want a little bit of that. I think the movie, it's annoying to me personally when they kind of hand wave around that. So that kind of frustrated me. And just the pacing of it and the plot unfurled to me more like a television season where like there's new plot elements that then we deal with that for like 10 minutes and then we move on to something
Yeah.
different, something different, something different. And then the movie at the end becomes something very different than it was at
Mm-hmm.
the outset, but not in like an interesting way. It just felt
Mm-hmm.
more like methodical. Though I will say the ending and sort of the message of, what they're trying to say is a cycle of violence begets violence and
Right.
people are not born bad. It's their environment. So you have to make sure that, by stop, if you don't be violent to them, then violence will slowly go down. I think that's all
Right.
great messaging. And I, by the very end of the movie, like the last 10 minutes, I'm like, okay, like I can line up with this message and I like that it's making this statement in this way. It's kind of interesting. So it ended kind of well. So I think it's an okay movie. I'm not going to say it's bad, but when I was watching it, I was sort of like, this isn't very good. And Joseph Gordon-Levitt too, his impersonations of like Bruce Willis got found. It felt like an SNL skit sometimes
It
when he
doesn't
had like
work.
the
And
eye movements.
yeah,
Oh, he's trying to talk like Bruce.
yeah, it doesn't work.
Didn't
And the
really work.
makeup feels very false now. But at the time,
Yeah.
I remember like, oh, this is very interesting, very cool. But yeah, it just doesn't work. And that's interesting about the episodic nature, which I guess is why it feels amateurish and
Mm-hmm.
tryhardy, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the dialogue is not very good either, the way
Mm.
it's written. So, you know, sometimes people like try something new. I will give Ryan Johnson credit for that, right? Like it is an original movie. It
Mm-hmm.
has stuff on its mind. It's trying to do interesting things, and that's why it did work when it came out. So, high points in my books for that, but it just doesn't hold up, and it's not very good.
Yeah, I think there's the talent. It's clear there's talent there, but it's
Yeah,
talent that's still being developed. And I think he is a filmmaker
yeah.
who's, getting better over time. Which I like that we're giving him, we isn't like we have any control, the two of us, but I mean like the industry or society or whatever, the chance to continue to grow his skills. into, what he's becoming now, which I do think his last couple films have been good. The Glass Onion and Knives Out movies, I think those were fun and better
Yeah, those
suited,
are
I think, than
fun,
this.
better. Although I was thinking about that if I went and rewatched those, how would I feel? And I
Oh,
instantly was like, I have no desire to rewatch those movies. Partly because also they're, mystery movies. So once you've seen them, you
mm,
sort of have seen them. But even
hmm
so, like I watched, the classic British mysteries over and over again because it's not about the plot, it's about the feeling, and
and the
I know it's trying to
characters, yeah.
go for the Agatha Christie like feeling, but I don't know, there is something about in this realm of like it doesn't age well or it
Mm,
feels very of its time
hmm
quality that his movies have, and I think that's still there in my
mm,
head. I
mm.
don't know. So
Well,
yeah.
I'm glad you put this on the list
Yeah.
because I have been meaning to rewatch this and see if maybe I missed something, and I don't think I I don't think I
No.
did, and I don't know if I'll be coming back to this anytime
No, I
soon.
would
Though
not be.
I do sort of feel like this might have been Bruce Willis's last like real performance, and he's very good. He's an actor.
Yeah.
I just love Bruce Willis a lot, and it's sad to see kind of, what's happening to him health wise. And I think this is the last time he's
Yeah.
really present, and he just does an amazing job as
Yeah.
Bruce always does. So, but I'm glad you put this on the list. Now I remember Emily Blunt is in it, which I literally forgot before I watched it. Hi there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I review a new release and then discuss 6 other movies made by that film's actor or director and how they shaped us. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.